The first comment from the other side today was, how can we make sure that we offer Iran aid? From Mr. Sicilian, can we ensure that we can offer aid over to Iran? That was the first question that came out of this committee. Second question that came out was this, offering that you should spend more time here and that Secretary Clinton spent 11 hours here. Wow, we should give her a hand of congratulations. Are any of my colleagues, I'm willing to offer time for this, who have been chastising the president, who keep saying over and over and over that we're less safe because of killing Soleimani, willing to say right now, I'll offer you time, that you wish Soleimani was still alive?
Soleimani, you know better than that. Shame on you for even asking that question. And shame on you for suggesting we're not concerned about the safety of our embassies.
I reclaim my time.
You know better than that.
Will the gentleman yield?
American citizens around the world.
Do you believe coronavirus is a hoax?
I'm not going to comment on what others say.
I'm just asking you, do you believe the coronavirus is a hoax?
I'm just telling you what the Secretary of State's doing.
Do you believe the coronavirus is a hoax?
We're working to keep people safe.
You can't even answer that question.
Yeah,
it's it's not even a gotcha question. You believe the coronavirus is a hoax?
It's a gotcha moment. It's not useful.
Is the coronavirus a hoax? Can you just answer that question?
We're taking it seriously. This is serious.
Rarely have I seen adults behave in such a despicable and rude manner as they have today, including employing bullying tactics, which I think is reprehensible.
I haven't been in Congress long enough to be bitter or shout out at you or anything to cause any great attention.
You'll learn quickly.
To myself, yeah. Well, I was kind of hoping I would so I could get some more TV time, and I haven't, but nobody's even taken my picture, as you can see, so I'll just keep. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. I'll put you on my Christmas card list.
Now, a famous radio interview with Mary Louise Kelly, I think you know her. She asked you not once, not twice, but 3 times what the administration was going to do to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Here's what you said.
My question again, how do you stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon?
We'll stop them.
How? Sanctions?
We'll stop them.
Well, since you made that comment, Iran has tripled the amount of stockpiled uranium it has. So I'm going to give you another chance to answer the question. How are we going to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon?
We'll stop them.
Well, that's really not a plan.
Let me give you a more fulsome response.
I'll take my time back since you're making fun of my question. I'll just take my time back.
I'd be happy to give her more fulsome.
We'll stop them as like a bumper sticker. That's not a plan.
I'd be happy to give her more fulsome response.
So I'll go back to the interview with Ms. Kelly.
You decided to have some fun. I thought I'd have a moment.
Excuse me, Mr. Pompeo, I've got my time back. To use your words further on in the interview, I guess you think this is funny. She asked you, told you that Iran had admitted that they'd removed all limits on their centrifuge program, and you said, in effect, well, he's blustering. Frankly, Mr. Pompeo, I agree blustering is dangerous, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons development, but today you're just blustering. This is not a plan. This is not an acceptable substitute for a plan, and we're just not going to allow that. I yield back.
Kinzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is exhausting. I mean, this multimedia dog and pony show that's being put on, and nobody thinks the Secretary of State thinks this is humorous. We can have a moment of levity without trying to get a YouTube moment out of it, or without, being upset and feigning anger so that you can go get a TV hit tonight on a cable station. And Mr. Secretary, you were on this, you understand this committee. I fought like hell to get a waiver, because I'm on Energy and Commerce, to get on this committee, because the thing I love about this committee, was its bipartisanship. The whole time we had the majority, we never took one vote that was partisan on this committee, not once. Our very first thing that we did on this committee under the new majority was take a partisan vote. I think we took 2 of them. One of the very first ones was Yemen, preventing the U.S. from doing anything in Yemen, because that's a campaign issue out there right now, even though most people have no idea what's going on. I'll just ask you real quick, Mr. Secretary, how much humanitarian aid has Iran provided to the Yemen crisis?
0.
Thank you. But you've been on this. You understand what's going on here, this show. The Soleimani, initially, I think a lot of folks did not even know who Soleimani was, and then all of a sudden find out he's killed, and then they're outraged about it. A point I'd like to make is we operated, and I was part of those operations, against Iranians in Iraq during the Iraq War. So by killing Soleimani in Iraq, protecting U.S. troops like we did in Task Force 17, we were operating under the same authority that we had to defend American troops against Iran that we did when we killed Soleimani in Iraq, by the way. So when all this discussion about not having the authority, then you're saying that we didn't have the authority to defend ourselves and operate against Iranian IED networks in Iraq in 07 and 08. So all that positive movement we made to defend our troops was totally illegal because Congress didn't authorize it. It is the same authorization that we have today, and I would argue that it was quite proportional. Because instead of blowing up sites where there's 100 soldiers working that want a paycheck in Iran, it may come to that someday if Iran decides to escalate. But instead of doing that, we killed the man responsible for these deaths. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you quickly, how many Americans have been killed and injured as a result of Mr. Soleimani?
Hundreds.
How many people around that region do you think are dead, including the Syria crisis, because of Mr. Soleimani?
Thousands from every faith, including thousands and thousands of Muslims.
So I think, my friends on the other side of the aisle say, well, we get it. He was a bad guy. Yeah, he was a bad guy. However, X, Y, Z, whatever the argument is. It's like saying Osama bin Laden was a bad guy. No, he was a demon. Mr. Soleimani also was a demon. This is a guy that traveled around arrogantly in the Middle East, bragging about the amount of people he killed, bragging about his ability to expand the Iranian empire and the methods that come along with that. 500,000 dead Syrians right now. By the way, Assad would not be in power if it was not for Iran. We look at the destabilization of Lebanon. We look at the innocent dead people in Yemen, at the Yemen conflict. That's not America and Saudi Arabia. That's because the Iranian regime overthrew the legitimate government of Yemen, parks weapons in the middle of populated territories so that when they are bombed, when they threaten airplanes, it kills civilians and they can parade the civilians out. That's the heartlessness of what we're talking about. Mr. Secretary, I also want to just mention on the airliner. After the Iranians shot down the airliner, it was amazing to see the number of people that blamed President Trump for shooting down the airliner. None of this would happen if it wasn't for President Trump's irresponsibility, is what I was told. I think an important thing to remember is we killed Soleimani, the right move. Iran reacted, and then fully expecting us to react, they turned their surface-to-air missile sites on, trying to defend their airspace, fully assuming America would react, and we didn't, because we showed restraint. And then a trigger-happy or whatever the situation was, surface-to-air missile operator shot down the airliner. That wasn't President Trump. I would argue President Trump showed a great deal of restraint. So, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate you coming in here. I am sorry. Some of my colleagues have been very respectful in their questions, legitimate questions, but I am sorry that some haven't, and I yield back.
Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you and I were both on the Intelligence Committee before you left to go to the CIA, and I'm still on that committee. I listened to your answers on classified information, and I've seen that classified information, and after reviewing it, I don't think that you're telling us the truth. And I would encourage the President and you to declassify as much of that as possible. I think if the American people read it themselves, they wouldn't believe that you're telling us the truth. Here's my question. My colleagues have shown killing Soleimani made America less safe in ways that were entirely predictable. And yet, it doesn't seem like the administration was at all prepared for a vote to expel American forces from Iraq, or for guided missile strikes that forced our service members to hide in bunkers, or for a complete halt to the fight against ISIS. Just like the pullout from Syria, the President made a decision with no planning and no understanding of the consequences. This is exactly why the framers of our Constitution decided not to entrust any single person with the power to take America to war. Instead of following the law and seeking authorization, you first said there was an imminent threat, which we know isn't true. You then concocted a theory that Congress had somehow already authorized you to attack Iran. Mr. Secretary, do you really believe Congress authorized the President to attack Iran?
I'm very confident that every action that this administration has taken is fully lawful.
The President and the administration has referenced the 2002 AUMF. Let me ask you, Mr. Secretary, how many times does the 2002 Saddam Hussein authorization, which you're invoking here, mention Iran?
I'll leave to the lawyers to debate the scope of that, but I know that this was discussed vetted, approved by the lawyers, as has every action this administration has taken. We conducted this attack fully inside our statutory and constitutional responsibility. The president acted lawfully.
You know, Mr. Secretary, that it doesn't mention Iran. Every member of this body knows that Congress never authorized war with Iran, and we certainly didn't do it 18 years ago on an authorization for an entirely different war. I yield to Mr. Espiat of New York.
We all came here to discuss some very important issues of life and death, war and peace, ultimately also about the separation of powers and our constitutional rights as a duly elected branch of government to know what's going on and whether or not we will engage in warlike action. But the fact of the matter is that Americans across the country, as they send their children to school, as they went to work, were terrified. We are terrified as a nation about the coronavirus, particularly when we read in the papers that one of the top officials, the vice president of Women and Family Affairs in Iran, contracted the disease. And we saw yesterday how Wall Street took an unprecedented dive. Americans are terrified. I'm terrified about the coronavirus. My question, I know you want to answer questions, so my question is a very direct one. A yes or no answer required. Do you feel that we should divert funding to build a wall to stop the spread of this coronavirus that's terrifying American families across our nation? We have a money problem. The president has presented a deep cut to your department. Do you feel we should divert money from building the wall to stop this pandemic? Yes or no?
It's a straw man argument.
Yes or no?
It's a straw man argument.
Yes or no? Give me an answer. You want to answer questions. Yes or no?
We can do
You're
all of
I
the
reclaim my time. Yes or no? Do you feel we should divert funding from building the wall to stop this pandemic that's terrifying American families? Yes or no?
America has the resources.
You're not answering my questions. Let me ask you another question. Your State Department personnel are the first point of contact, regularly the first point of contact overseas, from diplomatic engagements to consular service. Do you feel your employees are at risk exposed to the coronavirus? They're in China, they're in all over Asia. Do you feel your employees are in danger, in risk of contracting the coronavirus?
We've taken a number of actions.
Are they in risk of contracting this virus? Yes or no?
Sir, would you permit me to answer?
Yes, give me a yes or no answer.
It's more complicated. It's a complicated
No,
world,
it's not.
Yes,
You know,
it is.
you're sitting in a consular office interviewing people in China or in Japan or in Asia. Are you at risk of contracting this disease?
Every one of our ambassadors evaluates the risks to their officers every day. Our officers are all across the world, not just from coronavirus, are at risk.
Time of
Why
the
I'm so
gentleman
proud of what they're
has
doing.
expired.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
I yield
Yoho.
back.
Mr. Yoho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I'll answer that last question. Yes, everybody's at risk of it.
Yes, everyone.
Mr. Secretary, you said in the beginning the Trump administration will neither tolerate or appease the Iranian terrorist regime. Yet the president has said he would be open to talking to him. And I think that's great. And we're thankful for that, but that should be the policy of America beyond this administration and hopefully for the next administrations, that we will not tolerate this kind of activity against our country. So I appreciate them standing strong. My colleagues have, I was just going to point out one of them, but many of them have laid out claims that there is no strategy, pulling out of the JCPOA, eliminating Soleimani, sanctions on Iran, the other things, no response to coronavirus. But a lot of the things we did do, pulling out of the JCPOA, the sanctions, those are the strategies, and I think you'll see the response down the road. As far as the coronavirus, my colleagues on the other side said this administration's done nothing. We've had 2 hearings in this committee, on the subcommittee, Chairman Barra and myself, and we've had the administration here. In fact, we had 2 epidemiologists that showed up. We've had 2 hearings on coronavirus with epidemiologists, State Department employees, Dr. Redfield from the CDC, and we have offered help to Iran and to China, and they have not taken it. To date, everybody's worried about coronavirus. The last thing we need to do is dramatize it that everybody's going to get coronavirus. We did that with Zika, we did that with Ebola, and we were blessed because of the system we have in this country. To date, there are 57 cases confirmed of coronavirus of Americans. 40 of them were on a cruise ship. I won't mention the name. 3 were from Wuhan, 12 are travel related, and 2 are person to person. So I think of in a country of 330 some million people, that's pretty darn good. And so I applaud the administration. We talked to Dr. Redfield yesterday. He says they are staged, they are ready to go. We talked to Patrick Kennedy that received the cruise ship in Cambodia. The State Department was there. They had 6 staging areas. They worked with Hun Sen and the Cambodian government, which I appreciate, and they got those people home safely. I do have some questions that are pertinent to this hearing. With Soleimani being eliminated, can you report in this setting, have you seen a weakening in Iran's Quds force or their proxies in Syria, Lebanon, or Yemen, and anywhere else?
I'd prefer to answer that by saying that the cumulative effect of the actions that we have taken since this administration come into office have reduced the capacity for the Islamic Republic of Iran to inflict terror around the world. There's no doubt about that.
No doubt about that, and I feel like that. Do you have a sense on the replacement, Mr. Ghani?
In this setting, I'll simply say that Qasem Soleimani was a unique leader in that the broader institution and array of the Islamic Republic of Iran. He was a loud voice. He was a voice that had lots of people who were willing to listen to him, and there is not a leader that is likely to be able to replace him completely, adequately, and fully.
And I think that is justification enough. If we look at our servicemen and women that were either killed or were wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan, we know 70% of those came from IEDs. 90% of those came from Iran. Who is in charge of those?
Those were Quds Force operations that was led by Qasem Soleimani.
Right, and then we can go back to when Bill Clinton and President Obama, or prior to President Obama, Bill Clinton had the opportunity to remove Osama bin Laden. He had 10 to 12 different times he had the opportunity to apprehend him or eliminate him. He chose not to. The question is, would 9/11 happen had we done that?
I don't want to speculate.
We can't speculate.
Yeah.
But we can probably look into the future. Had Soleimani stayed, there would have been more deaths attributed to Iran and the IEDs. And so I commend this administration for doing what they did. And sir, you've got a tough job. We need to focus on what's going on in the world. It's not just Iran. We've got China, we've got North Korea, we've got what's going on in Venezuela, we've got the economies, being adjusted all over the world. And so we can't just focus on one area. We've got to look at the whole picture, and I would think Congress would come together to focus on that, and I yield back.
Mr. Malinowski.
Mr. Secretary, you and I had what I thought was a very constructive conversation at the Munich conference about the importance of defending State Department personnel, and I appreciated some of the things that you said to us about that. But since we got home, we've heard the following statement from a White House deputy spokesperson. He said, "Too often we have people in this government, the federal government is massive with millions of people, and there are a lot of people out there taking action against this president, and when we find them, we will take appropriate action." We've seen reports that the White House Personnel Office is compiling lists of so-called deep state people, disloyal people to purge. There are some 24,000 civil and foreign service officers, Mr. Secretary, who are also listening to you right now. They know that they have a duty to implement this president's policies, and they do. You called them just a moment ago amazing people. You know they're not working against this president. But they also feel they have a responsibility to share with you and their president their best judgment, to tell you the truth as they see it, whether it's what the leadership wants to hear or not. So my question is, if they do that, if, for example, a State Department official goes to a meeting at the White House and reports that there are more ISIS fighters today than when ISIS took over half of Iraq in 2014, that the strike against Soleimani may have temporarily hampered our ability to fight them, or if a public health expert working for you tells the public or the president that, this virus isn't necessarily going to go away when it gets warm, are you going to back them up when they speak what they believe to be the truth? Are you going to stand by while people in the White House talk about purging your employees?
Yeah, actually, this is a really easy question. There is not a day goes by that State Department officials don't tell me things that I disagree with. Not one. Can't imagine. Big organization. I actually welcome it. I had all my ambassadors in this week. The Chief of Mission Conference was in town. I heard lots of voices. What I always demand from them is the truth as best they know it. Their policy judgments as well. They have lots of experience, time on the ground in many of these places, and I always welcome that.
Are you willing to get into a fight with the White House if necessary, as all of your predecessors would have, in the face of these kinds of comments from like a 29-year-old guy in the White House personnel office?
Yeah, it's not about fighting. It's about being right. It's about making sure that we deliver on behalf of the American people. I do that every day. I work to make the case for delivering American diplomacy in the way that this institution always has. We've built it up. We have made it better than when my predecessors were there, and I hope that my successor makes it better than when I'm here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I hope we see you do that publicly. And I yield to Mr. Liu.
January 7th, Iran's foreign minister told NPR's Mary Louise Kelly that following the Soleimani strike, Iran was going to get rid of all limits on the centrifuges that Iran uses to enrich uranium. So let me put that into some context. As of last November, the IAEA said that Iran's stockpile had grown to over 800 pounds. But then after the Soleimani attacks, Iran told the world that stockpile has more than tripled to about 2,600 pounds. So my question to you is, does Iran have more enriched uranium now than when Donald Trump took office?
Yes.
Okay. I want to switch to coronavirus because it's on top of people's minds.
May I just make sure I get that?
No, that's fine. Yes is good.
They have enriched to a higher level than they did when we took office. That's a true statement. The maximum, it's a little more complicated. I just wanted to be more precise.
So I'm going to switch to the coronavirus, which is top of people's minds. Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, told the Conservative Political Action Conference that the coronavirus was a hoax of the day. Do you agree with Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mulvaney, that the coronavirus is the hoax of the day?
The State Department is doing everything it can to protect American citizens around the world.
Do you believe coronavirus is the hoax of the day?
I'm not going to comment on what others say.
I'm just asking you, do you believe the coronavirus is a hoax?
I'm just telling you what the Secretary of State's doing.
Do you believe the coronavirus is a hoax?
We're working to keep people safe.
You can't even answer that question.
Yeah,
it's not even a gotcha question. You believe the coronavirus is a hoax?
It's a gotcha moment. It's not useful.
Is the coronavirus a hoax? Can you just answer that question?
We're taking it seriously. This is a serious.
Are you at 12:15 today? Are you in fact yourself speaking at CPAC? At 12:15 today, are you speaking?
Yes, I am. I'm planning.
All right. So you can only give 2 hours to this bipartisan group of members of Congress, and instead of answering questions on life and death issues from a bipartisan group of America's representatives, you're going to go talk to a special interest group.
Yes.
You, sir, represent all Americans, not a special interest group. It is shameful. You can't even answer basic questions. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Mast.
The first question that I would offer, I'd offer to yield you 10 seconds, Mr. Chairman. Was it appropriate for Ms. Lowenthal to offer information from a classified setting?
Who?
Ms. Lowenthal, was it appropriate? I did not yield you any time, ma'am. Mr. Chairman.
I think we have, I don't decide on the appropriateness of it. Every member of Congress has a right to say whatever they feel they need to.
I will be asking that the Ethics Committee determine whether that was appropriate for her to offer information from a classified setting. Now, I want to talk about some important points that were made in the very beginning of this hearing. The first comment from the other side today was, how can we make sure that we offer Iran aid? From Mr. Sicilian, can we ensure that we can offer aid over to Iran? That was the first question that came out of this committee. Second comment from the other side.
Would the gentleman yield?
No, I will not. Second question that came out was this, offering that you should spend more time here and that Secretary Clinton spent 11 hours here. Wow, we should give her a hand of congratulations, not even 1 hour for every hour that she allowed our men and women overseas to be killed without dispatching any QRF, any quick response force. Congratulations for that. I want to ask a couple questions here. It does make sense to me that many on the other side are upset about killing somebody who was attacking our embassy. That is consistent with not defending Benghazi. That would be consistent. So I want to ask here, are any of my colleagues, I'm willing to offer time for this, who have been chastising the president, who keep saying over and over and over that we're less safe because of killing Soleimani, willing to say right now, I'll offer you time, that you wish Soleimani was still alive? I'm willing to yield you time. You said we're less safe. I'm willing to yield you time if you want to say you wish.
I'm happy to answer your question. Of course, we think
I didn't yield you time yet. If
well, you said you want to yield time. Do you want an answer or not?
Would you like to ask me if I would yield you a moment?
Yes. Happy to answer your question.
I will yield
We
you a
believe the
moment,
principal
Mr.
responsibility of the President of the United States is keep the American people safe. We believe this action ultimately has made us less safe.
So do you want Soleimani still alive?
Of course not. Nobody on this side wants Soleimani alive. You know better than that. Shame on you for even asking that question. And shame on you for suggesting we're not concerned about the safety of our embassies.
I reclaim my time.
You know better than that.
Will the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman yield?
I'll offer a moment ago.
Will the gentleman yield?
Would you like to offer that you wish Soleimani was still alive? I will yield.
Will the gentleman yield? Yes. I'm Congresswoman Spanberger from Virginia.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
And referencing what you stated earlier, the point of it was there was no evidence given in the classified briefing. None. None of imminence. None. And as a former CIA case officer, I am very happy that Soleimani is dead.
So
but we need to have strategy, and we need to ensure that we are protecting the American people, and those are the focuses of our questions to the Secretary today.
Everyone yield, please. Everyone yield. The gentleman reclaims his time.
Again, it's said no less than 10 times, we're less safe, we're less safe, we're less safe because Soleimani was killed. It was said over and over here. So that's a simple question. Do you wish he was still alive? I'll still hold on for another moment here if anybody wants to offer. They wish he was still alive.
Will the gentleman yield?
I haven't yielded you any more time. No, you've used up enough. Thank you.
We'll try to get the gentlewoman.
I have another question. At this point, would any of my colleagues like to offer this? At what point would you say that Iran has gone too far? I'm willing to offer time for that. When can you say Iran has crossed a red line? I'll sit here and wait.
Will the gentleman yield?
Absolutely, if you want to offer when Iran goes too far for you, please. Then if not, I will reclaim my time.
The question was when Iran crossed a red line, and so I'm asking, in response, I'd like you to first define what a red line is.
I'm asking,
what red line?
What is your red line? When, for you, does Iran go too far that it justifies killing Soleimani or taking some other sort of action against Iran? What is your red line for any of my colleagues over here?
Iran went too far decades ago, but the question is whether or not there's authorization for this particular strike.
Which, when we go out there and label somebody a designated terrorist, when we put that wanted sign on their back, there is justification for a strike. Just as if...
that's a sanctions designation. That has nothing to do with use of force.
Time, ma'am. I'm reclaiming my time. Just as if his now replacement, Mr. Ismail Ghani, he has a wanted poster on his back being the head of a designated terrorist organization. So, would anybody else care to offer that they have a red line for actions of Iranian aggression?
Who is next? Mr. Deutsch?
Mr. Deutsch is next.
Okay.
In my last couple seconds, I will offer this. I heard one response for a red line of Iranian aggression. That leads me to believe there are no red lines for many of my colleagues for Iranian aggression. That should be concerning.
Mr. Deutsch, Mr. Trone.
11 hours of testimony by Secretary Clinton on Benghazi. 2 hours, by Secretary Pompeo on Iran. Arrogance, arrogance. Mr. Pompeo, I think the way the administration has handled Iran policy in recent months explains why so many of us are concerned about the response to coronavirus. If the administration isn't going to tell the truth about the alleged imminent threat to our people in our embassies, why should the American people have the confidence in the statements about the threat this disease poses? If the administration hides the fact that the number of service members who are injured in an attack, how can we know the numbers about diagnosis and quarantines are accurate? When the administration fires or sidelines people like Ambassador Yovanovitch, Lieutenant Colonel Vindeman, D&I McGuire, or this week the HHS SEC whistleblower who's being targeted just because they told the truth. Should we believe what you tell us about another looming crisis? The American people are scared, sir. My constituents are scared. And the administration's track record of incompetence in dealing with crisis doesn't inspire confidence. And to make it worse, the president has tried to slash the personnel and programs that can make us better equipped to grapple with the global health crisis. It's reckless. So we end up with mixed messages, muddled information, confusion. It's really the last thing we want in this situation. We need to do better. The American people clearly deserve better. I yield to Mr. Allred.
No one disputes that Soleimani was a dangerous, hardened terrorist, and no one over here mourns his death. I know that some would prefer to take a simple path, to call hard-fought negotiations to cap Iran's nuclear program that is now back on, as has been evidenced today, appeasement, a term with, we know, historic freight, or declare an unauthorized strike to kill one of Iran's most senior generals, the same as taking out any other terrorist, as if there are not geopolitical consequences at stake. But as a member of this committee, it's our job to ask, and then what? Because foreign policy and the actions taken on the global stage can't be short-sighted. They have to consider what comes next. What happened after the strike was a series of actions that were both predictable and hurt the long-term national security interests of the United States, similar to some of the impulsive decisions we have seen from this administration, such as turning our backs on the Kurds after a phone call, or inviting the Taliban to Camp David on the week of 9/11. And now we face the possibility of a historic global pandemic led by a president and an administration that have shown they are incapable of thinking about what happens next. This administration has left the State Department in key positions vacant. It's left the National Security Council and the CDC with key positions vacant. And of course, as my colleagues have pointed out, sought to slash critical funding. Governing and leading the world requires stable leadership. The world looks to us for that leadership. They watch us. They fear our military, but more than that, they respect our values and how we lead. Government by chaos makes us less safe and the world less safe. I hope and pray for our great country that we will get our act together as we face this coronavirus, and I will work with this administration to do everything I can to protect my constituents and our great country. I hope that you will, in the future, give this committee the time that it deserves to discuss these issues. The American people want to know why we took this strike, what went into it, what the explanation is. There has been no debate. We need to talk about the authorizations for such actions. That's our role in a democracy. And I encourage you to give us the time to have that discussion. I yield back.
Mr. Wright.
As you've seen, Ringling Brothers has nothing on this committee. Rarely have I seen adults behave in such a despicable and rude manner as they have today, including employing bullying tactics, which I think is reprehensible. I want you to know that I think you're doing an outstanding job and that the United States of America and the world are safer because you're the Secretary of State. I have a real simple question, and then I'm going to yield because we're about out of time for the committee. It has to do with the protesters in Iran. Realizing the limitations we have to affect things internally, do you believe we're doing everything we can to support those protesters? Is there anything Congress can do that would help the protesters in Iran?
We have taken a very different approach with respect to the protesters than the previous administration did. We are doing all the things that we have in our toolkit. This is what we do in countries where people are demanding freedom, liberty. They want simple, basic human rights that have been denied them for so long inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. We saw what happens with this fraudulent election. They not only didn't let people run, but then the Iranian people chose not to vote as well. They knew it was a fraud, a joke, that it wasn't a real election. I'm happy also to share with you in another setting all of the things that the administration is doing to try to create an environment that the Iranian protesters can, at the very least, not be harmed. And then our effort more broadly, even than just throughout the Middle East, is aimed at standing up free and sovereign Iraq, Lebanon, that is not suffering under the hands and control of Hezbollah. Same thing with the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is a comprehensive strategic approach to the region, and if we get it right, the people of that region will be better off, and America will be more secure.
Great. Thank you, and I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Burchett.
I haven't been in Congress long enough to be bitter or shout out at you or anything to cause any great attention.
You'll learn quickly.
To myself, yeah. Well, I was kind of hoping I would so I could get some more TV time, and I haven't, but nobody's even taken my picture, as you can see, so I'll just keep. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. I'll put you on my Christmas card list. But since we took out Soleimani, have Iran's actions changed any that you've seen? I suspect they walk out every morning and look up in the sky, but besides that.
So the answer is yes, but it's much more complicated than that. There's no single act that you can stare at independently and say that this was the one variable that moved the entire strategic puzzle. It's more comprehensive. It's bigger than that. This is just one element of the efforts that we've undertaken. So to say that the responses, to draw a correlation like that, I want to be very, very cautious about.
More of a long-term thing, so thank you for that. How has the administration's maximum pressure campaign affected Iran's ability to fund Hezbollah?
You can see it. In a classified setting, we're happy to share the actual data, but there's hard decisions being made. Difficult decisions about whether you should make payroll for Hezbollah, how big a Shia militia can you support inside of Iraq, how should you work on your external assassination campaign in Europe, should you underwrite malign activity in Afghanistan, finite resources. It was referenced earlier, they were shipping roughly somewhere between 2.7 and 2.9 million barrels per day of crude oil at closer to market prices. Today, that number's somewhere between 250,000 and 300,000 barrels a day, and they're getting deeply discounted or having to ship it to Syria in exchange for their work on the ground there. This has put enormous constraints on the regime and its ability to foment terror around the world, and America is safer, Israel is safer as well.
Thank you. What can be done to mend the rift between the Gulf countries to make the GCC an effective local deterrent against Iran?
We are encouraging all the Gulf states to join us in this effort. They all see the threat to a nation, see the threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Disputes amongst them make that more difficult to prosecute effectively, and we hope they'll get this figured out.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.